Thank you all for coming out on this clear but crisp day. So, Tao Yu Lectureship was endowed in 1991 through a generous gift from the University of Michigan Alumni Association in Taiwan as a permanent tribute to Dr. Tao Yu Wu, one of our late distinguished alumni. In 1907, Tao Yu Wu was born into a family of scholars in Canton, China. He received his PhD in 1933 from the University of Michigan under the direction of Samuel Gouchschmidt. Wu's early work on heavy elements pointed to the existence of transuranic atoms. He returned to China in 1934 to teach at Peking University. From 1946 to 1963, Dr. Wu directed the Theoretical Physics Division of the National Research Council of Canada. He was chair of the Department of Physics and Astronomy of SUNY Buffalo from 1966 to 1969. Dr. Wu was appointed director of the Institute of Physics of the Academia Sinica in 1962, chairman of the National Research Council of the Republic of China in 1967, and chair of the Committee for Science Development of the National Security Council, Republic of China, in 1967, a position he held for many years. He was also the president of Academia Sinica from 1983 to 1994. Under Dr. Wu's leadership, the policies laid down by the National Science Council in 1967, as well as the revision of science curriculum and the rewriting of science textbooks in high schools and the revitalization of the Academia Sinica, have made dramatic contributions to the development of science and technology in Taiwan. Tao Yu Wu was deeply respected for his honesty, integrity, and moral courage. He has inspired 4 generations of physics students in pre-war Peking and post-war United States and Taiwan. Among his students was Nobel laureate C.N. Yang and T.D. Lee. C.N. Yang delivered the first Tao Yu Wu lecture in 1992, and T.D. Lee delivered our lecture in 1995. Dr. Wu authored 21 books, including a 7-part series on theoretical physics and 7 volumes of collected essays. He had published over 120 papers in a wide variety of areas in modern and classical physics. In 1991, the University of Michigan conferred on him an honorary degree, Doctor of Science. The citation reads in part, "More than any other individual, Tao Yu Wu was responsible for raising physics to its current level in both mainland China and Taiwan, and chiefly for his extraordinary work as a teacher and scientific statesman that Dr. Wu has become known throughout the world." Commending his exceptional influence as a science teacher and policymaker, the university is proud to bestow upon Tao Yu Wu its honorary degree, Doctor of Science. In 1994, Dr. Wu was awarded the Presidential Medal in Taiwan for his distinguished achievement. Dr. Wu passed away on March 4th, 2000 in Taipei. And now, I'd like to introduce Professor Bob Savitt, who will introduce our speaker today.
Thanks, Brad. I need to do that, sorry. It's the curse of being left-handed. Tuesday mornings were always enormously difficult when our children, 3 boys and a girl, were living at home. The daily breakfast scramble for first shot at the New York Times became even more intense on Tuesdays and was focused on the Science Times. While only one of our children became a scientist, and thankfully not a physicist, the Tuesday Science Times was among the favorite reading of all of them, and our speaker today was one of the prime reasons for that. Dennis Overbye has been at the New York Times as an editor and writer for over 15 years, and for most of that time, his byline has been a regular presence on the pages of the Tuesday Science Times. Dennis Overbye is one of our country's foremost science writers. He received a BS degree in physics from MIT and did graduate work at UCLA. Before embarking on his writing career, Dennis worked for a number of years as a scientist at various companies, including Boeing. And in 1976, he became an assistant editor at Sky and Telescope magazine. And from 1976 to 1980, he was a senior editor at Discover magazine. Subsequently, he embarked on an independent writing career, during which time he published articles in Time magazine, Science, the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, among other publications. In 1998, he joined the staff of the New York Times and has been an editor and writer there ever since. In addition to his large body of scientific journalism, Dennis has written 2 books. Lonely Hearts of the Cosmos, The Scientific Quest for the Secret of the Universe, published in 1991, which was nominated for the Los Angeles Times Book Award in Science and was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award for Nonfiction, and Einstein in Love, a scientific romance, published in 2000. He's also the co-author with James Glanz of the forthcoming ebook, A Search for the Higgs Boson, the God Particle. In 1980 and in 1992, Dennis was awarded the Science Writing Award by the American Institute of Physics, and in 2005 he won the Science Journalism Award of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. I think it's safe to say that Dennis and his colleagues at the New York Times have contributed significantly to the science education and awareness of millions of their readers. I know my children owe Dennis a great debt of gratitude for his contribution to their lives and education. And so please join me in welcoming Dennis Overbye, the Cosmic Affairs correspondent of the New York Times, as he talks to us about Confessions of a Dinosaur in the Age of New Media.
Is this on? Can you hear me? Yes, no? Okay, great. Well, thank you for inviting me here to invigorating, refreshing Ann Arbor. I'm flattered and terrified to be here besmirching the list of Nobel laureates that have previously given this lecture. This is not my usual kind of venue. I do get invited a lot to visit college journalism classes, and even lately, even high school journalism wannabes have been calling me up, asking me for advice. All these people want. What? It's on. No? Is this any better? So I just hold this like this?
No, I don't want you to hold it like that. It's on. Let's go up here on the collar. Try it really high. Speak as loudly as you can. Try that.
All right, is that better? Yes. All right, so what all these people want basically is they want to know how I got my job. And what they really want is they want my job themselves. And that's great. It's a fantastic job. And I wish them well, but I do worry about their sanity. Because everybody knows that print is dead. The social media, the bloggers and the tweeters and Facebook are eating our lunch. And I can't think of a worse promising profession to go into these days than writing. In fact, it reminds me of the old story about the farmer who won the lottery, and his friend asked him, "So what are you going to do with all that money?" He says, "I'm going to keep farming until it's all gone." That's what I tell people who want to buy books. But the fact is, this is the only job I've ever been able to hang on to, and I'm going to keep it. I'm going to hang on as long as I can. I get to hang around in places like CERN with famous people like Stephen Hawking, John Grunsfeld, the Hubble repairman, Miss Halley Comet Deluxe. So, and I have a daughter who's in 6th grade, so you can do the math. I plan to be around at least for the inauguration of the giant Magellan one of these decades. So they have to carry me out of the building on a stretcher. So here's the building. My office is kind of right below the N, just below the bars there. If it weren't me taking this picture, you could probably see me up there with my feet up on the desk. So there are about 1,200 writers, reporters, video and web producers working at the Times, which is a big number compared to the average newspaper. There they are. Perhaps as the social media would like to see them, but they're not quite dead yet. So science has always been a part of the Times' mandate. Back in the day, the Times used to sponsor Arctic expeditions and balloon flights. That's all gone now. The Times had one of the first ever embedded reporters, Atomic Bill Lawrence, who wrote about the Manhattan Project from the inside. There he is on the island of Tinian before the bombing started. And since 1978 or 79, I forget which, we published a standalone Science Times section, which is considered one of the jewels in the Times' crown for some reason. There are about 15 reporters in the science department, and about a dozen editors and mysterious web and video people that I'm never quite sure what they do, but it's becoming more and more important. And when I go to a meeting, sometimes I'm surrounded by these digital people. We produce about 20,000 words a week. Half of it is in the Science Times, and the other half is spread out during the rest of the week whenever news happens. Here's one of the early Science Times covers. You're going to see a lot of this because I love looking at old newspaper pages. More recently, this was a real cheerful story I wrote. This one was just a year ago. I wrote the whole section myself. I was very proud of that, but since then, some of my other colleagues have also written whole sections by themselves, so it's not as big a deal as it once was. But of course, news doesn't just happen on Tuesdays. This was something I wrote on a day. It could have been a landmark day when they could have discovered dark matter, but they didn't. So it was fun, but it didn't get on the front page. Now, this is an important story, and it wasn't it was a Friday. And there's a story behind this story, which is really interesting and goes to the heart of some of the problems that scientists and journalists have. So this is about two astronomers, Arno Penzias and Richard Robert. I can't read anymore. I think it's Robert. They discovered radio signals that were the fading remnants of the Big Bang fireball that started the universe. In fact, their discovery basically ended the controversy about whether the universe had a beginning or not. But at the time, Penzias and Wilson they said they didn't appreciate how important this was until they actually saw it on the front page of the New York Times. Because Penzias and Wilson they stumbled on this radiation. They're trying to calibrate an antenna. There's a better picture of it. And they found there was this microwave hiss coming from all over the sky, and they couldn't get rid of it no matter what they tried to do. They shoveled out pigeon poop to no avail. So they were baffled, and finally through the grapevine, they ran into some other astronomers at Princeton who had just been doing some calculations on what the Big Bang fireball would look after 14 billion years of expanding and cooling, and in fact, it would look like exactly what they had discovered. So they wrote a paper. Sorry about this. But they were less excited about solving the cosmological mystery than the fact that they finally had an explanation for this hiss that had been driving them crazy. They weren't lousy radio astronomers anymore. It was real. So they wrote a whole paper describing the hiss, but they never said what it was. Only at the end of the paper, these words: a possible explanation for the observed excess noise temperature is the one given by Dickie Peoples, Roland Wilkinson, who graduated from this college, in a companion letter in this issue. And so you had to go and read this other paper to find out that this was the Big Bang calling. So in the news magazine, this is called burying the lead. It's the cardinal sin. Because you never know, maybe the reader is going to get bored and not get to the end of the article where the punchline is. Maybe the editor is going to decide it's too long for the space and it'll just lop out the final paragraphs. This happens. In science, maybe this is called modesty or respect for the scientific process, but sometimes it seems to me it's just covering your ass. Not going out on a limb where you put it there just in case it turns out to really be true. But this happens a lot. And in this case, they buried the lead so far that you had to go find another paper. But it worked, because Penzias and Wilson won the Nobel Prize. Now, back to Science Times for a minute. Well, we're often told that Tuesday outsells the other week's issues of the newspaper, and it may be true. I haven't checked the figures lately, but it would be just, because you can argue that science journalism is a vital component of our democracy today. It's never been more vital, which is one reason why we need help from all these kids who want to get into this profession. God help them. We're drowning nowadays in big data on everything from the workings of the brain to the currents of the oceans and whether we own our own genomes. How afraid should we be about the radiation from Fukushima? Or about global warming? What are we going to do about that? I'm getting ahead of myself here. Did I? Yeah. Do the masters of the universe really understand the laws by which the economy does or does not work? So science is a linchpin of the economy and of national security, we are told, not to mention that everyone wants to live forever. It's also become big business with the budgets and conflicts of interest to match. So as a result, all of us science writers have been burned one time or another by NASA telling us the shuttle was safe. They were going to fly a journalist up on one of the next flights. They were in the process of selecting them when Challenger blew up. Or telling us that arsenic could live on bacteria instead of phosphorus. So these days you have to, if you're in the writing about biomedical issues, you have to ask whether the person you're interviewing actually has a company and has patented the thing you're writing about. So science writing has changed. It's less gee whiz, it's more adult or adversarial than it used to be. So we've had to abandon the triumphal tales of the past, in which, we cure cancer, we land men on the moon. Instead of these gods, we have what my friend Key Davidson of the San Francisco Chronicle once called anti-heroes in lab coats. This is my favorite anti-hero in a lab coat. And that's okay, because science is intimidating enough to the rest of us without the requirement that it be performed by saints. And I would think that would be reassuring to kids as well. If the whole glory of science is that it's a method, it's a game that sinners can win as well as saints. And this guy, who I know pretty well, is an adulterer, a draft dodger, a bad poet, a flirt, a feckless father, but we love him anyway. And I just thought, this is Albert and his first wife, Mileva, in the bloom of youth and love. There's a poem he wrote about her. Oh my, that Johnny boy, so crazy with desire, while thinking of his dolly, his pillow catches fire. Of course, they had a horrible, mean, nasty divorce. So 40 years later, this is Einstein letting it all hang out. I believe with Schopenhauer that one of the strongest motives that lead men to art and science is escape from everyday life with its painful crudity and hopeless dreariness from the fetters of one's own ever-shifting desires. And there's this poem that he wrote for the son of a friend. And the moral of the story, which hardly anyone ever concedes, is that the upper half plans and thinks, but the lower half determines our fate. So if I have any advice to scientists in the audience, one would be that you should get over it. Stop pretending that science is in fact performed by saints. You're not fooling anybody by pretending that you're in an ivory tower. Now, in the areas I write about, which I refer to as cosmic affairs, physics and astronomy, there's not so much of this dramatic practical effects. The finagling on my beat is usually more metaphysical. Our cosmologists fooling us with this dark matter and dark energy, all these extra dimensions. Have the string theorists really earned their endowed chairs and their book contracts and their Milner Awards? Is there, oh, what's I missed? Sorry. Actually, this is a case where what I do does move markets, but I didn't write this, but I edited it like a week after I joined the Times. There is, okay. This was in the New Yorker. So these are the kinds of questions I worry about. Is there only one universe, or could there be many? Now, these seem like rather abstract things, maybe wouldn't keep you asleep at night, but you should care about them, because it's not just Einstein's universe, it's yours too. And it's the only one you'll ever know, so. All right. Now, the Times is supposed to be a paper of record. So a while ago, I did a little project. I went back and to see how we'd covered some of the landmark moments of science in the last century. So here are a few. 1905, Einstein invents relativity. This gave us yardsticks that stretch and contract, clocks that speed up and slow down, E equals mc squared, a lot of bad jokes about relative. There's no Einstein you can't see, but there are 23 stories on this page, the front page, but there's no Einstein. They've never heard of Einstein in New York. Einstein's name wouldn't be in the New York Times until 1917, when there was an article about some astronomers preparing for an eclipse in Goldendale, Washington. And they wanted to use the eclipse to check a prediction of Einstein's general theory of relativity, that light rays would be bent going around the sun. Didn't quite work out. Actually, they got the data, but the astronomer in charge never got around to reducing it. But Einstein's theory did get checked out 2 years later, in 1919, at an eclipse off the coast of Brazil, I believe. And it was a resounding success. On November 6th, at a meeting at the Royal Society in London, Newton's universe was pronounced dead after 250 years. The Times got the news 3 days later on November 9th. This is the front page. There's lots of talk about revolution here, but none of it is scientific. Einstein was on page 6. You can see up in the left-hand corner. See all those ads? Those were the glory days. So anyway, up there, there's a little article. You can see bigger. Eclipse showed gravity variation. Diversion of light rays accepted as affecting Newton's principles. Pretty opaque. Well, the next day they decided to do it again. Once again, it was not on the front page. In fact, this is page 17. But this is probably the most famous headline in the history of science writing. Lights all askew in the heavens. We rarely do it this well anymore. Okay. Moving along. October 27th, 1927. The world's physicists gathered in Brussels to talk about quantum mechanics. Einstein, Bohr, Heisenberg, they were all there. It was the nature of reality that was at stake. The Times, however, was not there. or this is Claude Shannon. There's no chance we were going to cover Claude Shannon in 19, but this is where bits and bytes and everything comes from. But I keep this in there because the idea that the subway fare was going up from a nickel to a dime is like nostalgic. Okay, this is my favorite. James Watson and Francis Crick published a paper in Nature on April 25th, 1953, describing the shape of the structure of DNA, the double helix. They only mentioned at the end of their little article that this shape provided a method for the transmission of genes. This was biology's moment, and it's still biology's moment, but that was another classic example of bearing the lead. And actually, the Times did have an article about this, apparently, not on the front page, in an early edition, but then it was replaced by a baseball score. All right. Watson and Crick's work bore its finest fruit on June 27th, 2000. This was when biologists just said they cracked the human genome. We were all over this one. So something has changed over the last 50 years. Somewhere along the way, it was decided that journalism, science news, was too important to be left to science reporters. We gained a small army of helpers to make sure we don't miss any more big moments. And I've printed out a few samplings of a recent day of email to show you how this works. NASA is, you may or may not be surprised, is one of our biggest helpers. I hear from them several times a day, including a daily video rundown in case you want to grab some footage from the 6 o'clock news or something. Johns Hopkins, the big medical center. U.S. Geological Society, trying to be trendy, cash in on the Olympics. Is MIT trying to be trendy and cash in on Fashion Week? Our competitors, they want attention. This is a magazine I used to work for. Science and Nature are big helpers. They're very helpful. They send us once a week, they send us embargoed tip sheets describing the papers that are going to be published the next week. Now this is a mixed blessing because there's so much of it. We could use up all those 20,000 words we're going to write in a week just responding to these papers, going to news conferences, and never do any original reporting of our own. And sometimes we have no choice because they send these tip sheets not to us, they send it to the Washington Post, The Guardian, USA Today, Time, every media outlet. So some of these stories are going to get written up, even if they're incremental or silly or even wrong, sometimes even because they are silly, because just out of self-defense. Because none of us wants to get a phone call at dinner time asking about some story that some editor saw on the Guardian website. And can we please match this before the newspaper closes? And this goes on and on. Now, there are the new kids in the block. The bloggers and the tweeters are going to eat my job. Here, for example, is a blog about physics and math that I look at every day by a guy at Columbia. It's pretty authoritative, especially about the math. Here's another blog by a string theorist who lives in Czechoslovakia now, and he's pretty knowledgeable about string theory and theoretical physics, Luboš. Luboš and Peter Voigt, the guy who did the previous blog, hate each other, and they're at each other's throats all the time online, which is sometimes interesting, and sort of sometimes you see things in stereo. That's one of the drawbacks of the social media. It comes with attitude, and you need to know who's writing it before. There's another blog. Resonance is a particle physicist. Nature has an online magazine. Bad Astronomy is a very good blog about astronomy. Here's Facebook, Twitter. I've gotten stories off Twitter, and I've broken stories on Twitter. I think I broke the news that the Kepler spacecraft had been disabled on Twitter. It's one of the few things I'm allowed to do without the intervention of an editor. So I kind of like that. Here's a new, very ambitious online magazine about physics. There's another ambitious online magazine about science in general. So a lot of this stuff is pretty good. There's a lot of material out there. It's more than you can read, actually. I mean, and here's Edge. Edge is an online salon that's run by John Brockman, who is a literary agent who represents a lot of scientists. And once a year, he publishes responses to what he calls the Edge question. This year, what scientific idea is ready for retirement? So 174 people responded. It came to 120,000 words from people like Richard Dawkins, Frank Wilczek, Freeman Dyson. And it's all for free. So that's one that bugs me, because they're destroying the market. The other thing that bugs me is, especially about the, possibly Brockman makes it back, or his authors make it back in book contracts, but because if he had to pay for that 120,000 words, it would cost him $1 or $2 a word, $250,000, which is not little. So the other thing is that, of course, the bloggers, they have no editors. They just sit there in their pajamas. They have an opinion, or whatever. I mean, some of these, they go on for thousands of words, but then they push a button and they're done. If I write something, it's got to go to an editor, then it has to go to a copy editor, then it has to go to a web producer, and then maybe it gets posted on the homepage, or maybe not, because maybe something else happened. A-Rod had a crisis, or the Pope died, all the trees in Atlanta fell down, which they might have today. So it takes hours. So the odds of me beating one of these people with news are minuscule. Okay, this is out of place here. All right. Another thing that's going on now is, of course, that a lot of these bloggers are scientists, and scientists are blogging, and so they're chiming in and talking back to us online, which could be a blessing or could be a curse, but it's good that they do that because the word isn't getting out. This is a recent survey that was just published in Mother Jones a couple of days ago, showing the percentage of Americans in different age groups who think that astrology is sort of scientific. And I don't think there's any very good news here. I mean, the one group that's gone down recently is the almost geezers, 55 to 64. But the young kids are all, they're getting with it. Now, it's always interesting to hear what the scientists say online when they think we're not listening. So this was another blogger, and he's talking about the articles recently. Stephen Hawking made some pronouncements about black holes. I didn't write about it, so this is not about me. Meanwhile, the media takes the 5 words, "there are no black holes," and creates almost pure fiction. Fiction that has almost nothing to do with the reality of the science. Well done, media, well done. Sometimes you're just like a black hole. Information comes in, and after being completely scrambled beyond recognition, comes back out again through a mysterious process that makes no sense to anyone. And if you read the comments on a blog like this, they're worse than we're more scurrilous, undeserving scoundrels. That wasn't me. Here's one that was written about me. It's for a long time, this was the first thing that came up if you Googled my name. I'd like to take a minute of language log time to slap Dennis Overbye real hard upside the head, if that's all right. And this was a kind of an article about snow. It's very appropriate today, I think, because New York is about to get whammed again. Dennis, your article about the physics of snowflakes begins with some boring crap about weather. It turns one more time to the tired old nonsense about the Eskimos and their legendary snow vocabulary. Only this time it's about New Yorkers, and all their snow words are unprintable. Ha ha hee hee. Oh, stop it, Dennis. I am laughing so uncontrollably not. Well, actually, there's a good side to this scrutiny. So often, all my most knowledgeable and critical readers and most helpful readers read me on the web. So they see the stories before they ever get printed in the newspaper. And I often get an email before I even know that my story has been posted, suggesting corrections in it, things I've misspelled or details I've screwed up, in time for me to fix them before we go to press, and then I can avoid a horrendous correction note in the next day's paper. So, all right, so I've misplaced that on the slide, but you might think with all this crosstalk that this is a golden age of science writing. In some ways it is. There's more stuff out there than you can ever read, and some of it's very well written. You can get the detailed explanation of the Poincare conjecture, or the side effects of any drug that you might be prescribed, or maybe even your prognosis if you're brave. The problem is that all this stuff goes out in the air and hardly anybody reads it. The average audience for one of these blogs that I showed you is maybe 5,000 devoted readers, but that's a drop in the bucket. So the audience is fractured into different layers depending on how sophisticated or devoted a reader you are. And as a result, as in every other area of our national life lately, we have no common communal experience about science outside of maybe Star Trek, which I think is not a good sign if we're actually going to come to some sort of conclusions about global warming or the advisability of fracking, or there's got to be some body of knowledge that we all draw on. Maybe this will change when they start showing Cosmos next month, but I don't know. You can get anything you want on the web, but it's all about who you follow and what you've bookmarked. And if you don't follow scientists, you don't bookmark scientific sites, you'll never get it. So you'll never hear anything that you don't agree with. That's where we come in, the New York Times. We're still hanging in there. So we have, yes, great. There are more people paying more money to read the New York Times now than at any time in its history. Partly because we keep raising the price, and partly because we started charging for digital readers a couple of years ago, and we now have 760,000 people who are paying to read the newspaper online. So advertising is advertising on this? Yes, advertising isn't on this, but we know what happened to advertising. It fell off a cliff, although it's falling more slowly lately. But so, all right. All right. Well, I'm often asked, what's a good story for all these people? what makes the front page of the Times. My colleague John Wilford, who wrote that moon landing story, once said that the criteria for a good story were big screw up, big comeback, and big bang. I'm laundering his language a little bit. So by those criteria, the Large Hadron Collider is the perfect front page story. So as you may know, this is our lab. It's outside Geneva at the laboratory called CERN. It's 17 miles around. It shoots protons at each other at basically the speed of light. It cost $10 billion, 20 years to build. I think some of the people in this room work on it. So tell me if I'm misrepresenting it, but is this? Whoops. Okay. Well, anyway, okay. Sorry, well, I wanted to show that. That's my head. That's my head at a place in the Atlas direct detector where these protons collide. But of course, they weren't running that day, so it was safe. And they're not running now, so you could go down there and be in that same chamber, I think. So, and of course, the LHC was aimed at finding something called the God particle, aka the Higgs boson. Now, there's Peter Higgs. He invented it 50 years ago. So the Higgs boson, in a general sense, is kind of comes as a particle that comes from this supposed field of energy that fills space in the universe, and other particles get their mass by interacting with this field. So if they found the Higgs boson, they would know this field existed, which is a huge deal. It plays a major part in the evolution of the universe. Without the Higgs field, atoms wouldn't be as big as small as they are. Actually, they wouldn't be at all. So it was important to find. And it was, I should say, the God particle is named by Leon Lederman, former director of Fermilab. There's his book. A lot of people hate it every time I use this phrase, the God particle, and I think Leon's a little sorry that he used it, but actually I think he did us a favor because it really dramatized physics for people who wouldn't ordinarily be interested. So I get complaints when I use this phrase, or when the headlines writers use this phrase. I stopped using it for a while, but the headline writers used it anyway. So I started putting it back in because I think it actually is important for people to have a sense of humor about this and realize that this actually allows people to connect with it in a way that they might not otherwise. So there's some Higgs boson cartoons. This one I was going to take out. Okay, there you go. It was also dramatic because over in Illinois, physicists at Fermilab were also searching for the Higgs boson, and they were near the end of their run. So it was a kind of a race between Europe and America to find the Higgs boson, except there was pretty much the same physicists at both laboratories. They're going back and forth across the ocean, but it was dramatic. However, okay. And everybody had been looking for it for a long time, and the CERN collider was either going to find it or that would be the end. And so John Ellis, who was a CERN theorist, said, and I couldn't use this quote in the newspaper, if we don't see anything, then in some sense we theorists have been talking bullshit all these years. So it was news for that, but it was also, it turned out, news because it might be dangerous. This worked. I'm really proud that this worked. one of the predictions of what might come out of the collider, one that was especially trumpeted by string theorists, was that it could discover extra dimensions of space-time by perhaps creating a black hole. But some people thought maybe creating a black hole wasn't such a great idea. And this became part of pop culture. And so there's a teenage girl, Indian girl, killed herself after being traumatized by media reports that the Large Hadron Collider could spark a Big Bang that could destroy the world. Her father said. Those are the most important words in this sentence. Her father said. It tells you we really don't know anything. But so it came to pass that a lawyer in Honolulu filed a lawsuit to stop the collider. And I found out about this. So I was doing my weekly rounds, writing another article about why it was going to be delayed. And this guy, Walter Wagner, he sent me the lawsuit. It was like 100 pages printed out. And I looked for the printout and I couldn't find it. And I didn't know what to do with this. I mean, it was very impressive. He knows enough physics to talk jargon, and it's all the law, it's all, he knows how to write a legal brief, too. And I thought, well, why, he named Fermilab in the Department of Energy as defendants, but what could I couldn't figure out what a judge in Honolulu could do to stop CERN. And Fermilab and the DOE had helped build the collider, but they weren't running it. But I called up Fermilab and said, so what about this? And Fermilab, they sort of laughed at me and said, oh yeah, these guys tried to stop the Tevatron too. Then I called up CERN and they laughed and said, oh, it's safe, we did a study. Actually, they did 2 studies, and then there was a third study eventually made. Each one was longer and longer. The last one ran to a couple hundred pages, I think. So finally, one Fermilab told me that they had been told to refer all questions to the Department of Justice. And so I freaked out. This is way out of my territory, my league. I don't know how to deal with this. And the Department of Justice couldn't tell me anything either. I thought, well, maybe there's some treaty or environmental agreement or something that I don't know about that would actually snag the LHC in red tape and stop it from opening on time. So I thought, well, I guess I'd better put this on the record. So I wrote an article. It was a sort of a good news, bad news kind of article. The bad news was that some people thought the Large Hadron Collider would be the end of the world. The good news was that it's going to be delayed. But the news that day was particularly grim. It was all about hurricanes and riots and famines. And the editors decided that this lawsuit would be kind of good comic relief on the front page. So they put it on the front page, asking Judge to save the world and maybe a whole lot more. There's the figure. So anyway, it's below the fold, but still being on the front page is a big deal. And the next day my inbox exploded. And famous physicists from all over the world emailing did demand to know what the hell did I think I was doing. And I was very embarrassed, and I will not show you any of those emails. So I explained that I tried to explain that I wasn't the only journalist who knew about this lawsuit, and all I ever wanted was somebody authoritative to tell me it didn't matter, but nobody would do that. Plus, I have to say, there was another aspect of this. Kind of the lawsuit sort of obscured the fact that a lot of thoughtful people had actually been thinking for a long time about risk and how you assess it and what the public should be exposed to. And it reminds me that, before they tested the first atomic bomb, somebody was assigned to do the calculation to make sure that it wouldn't set the atmosphere on fire. And so the answer was that it wouldn't, or it probably wouldn't. But you have to ask yourself, what would it have taken for them to call off the test? And I am reminded of Walker Percy's scientist's prayer, which appeared in his novel Love in the Ruins, about a brain scientist. Lord, grant that my discovery may increase knowledge and help other men. Failing that, Lord, grant that it will not lead to man's destruction. Failing that, Lord, grant that my article in Brain be published before the destruction takes place. I think it would be a pretty good scoop if I could report the end of the world, but there wouldn't, nobody would be there to read it. So, of course, the lawsuit was dismissed. It was big news when they turned the collider on a few weeks later. And the scientists, physicists around the world dressed up in pajamas to watch. And it was news a week later when it blew up and the connection between two of their superconducting magnets vaporized and setting the whole thing back 2 months, they said at the time. Actually, of course, it was a year and a half. And when it did come back, it was going to be run at half power because of these magnets weren't as robust as they thought they were. And I wrote about that. And the original headline, which I discovered in the middle of the night, was Giant Particle Collider Fizzles. And I thought that was a little strong, and I had it changed at the last minute. But again, everybody had already seen it online, so CERN was not amused. But then they finally did get it running, so that was news again. Time for the big comeback. But now there was a new problem, namely the old social media. So there's 3,000, there are two teams of 3,000 physicists apiece, each, looking for the Higgs boson. And what were the odds that one of these people wasn't going to be a blabbermouth, tweet it, blog it? Not very good. And I steeled myself for a year of chasing unfounded rumors and being woken up in the middle of the night, as happened when my editors saw something on Gawker or something like this. And they demanded to know. Of course, I knew the rumors were wrong. Then at some point, the rumor became that they weren't going to be able to find the Higgs boson. It wasn't there. And I thought I was going to have to write an article that said 6,000 physicists failed to find the Higgs boson. And I know that CERN would not be amused at that. But this is an article that was written, 315 physicists report failure in search for supersymmetry. This is a famous headline at Fermilab. And they were not amused at that either. But then at the last minute, a signal did pop up. But nobody knew if it would last, if it was going to be real. Physicists will have to keep holding their breath a while longer. So finally, CERN scheduled a seminar, a special seminar on July 4th in Geneva. This was somewhat inconvenient for me because I had already arranged to be in Aspen that week. The Aspen Center for Physics was having their 50th anniversary. So that meant this event would happen at 1 o'clock in the morning, my time. And I knew what was going to happen. These guys were going to give technical talks. The two teams each would give 1 hour technical talks about their results. Then at the end, somebody would show a graph maybe, and they might say something like, we found a resonance at 125 GeV with a significance of 4.9 sigma, which is a fancy way of saying we found a new particle and there's one chance in 3 million we're wrong. So they were going to bury the lead until 3 o'clock in the morning, at which point I probably wouldn't know if they found it or not. So if they did declare that they'd found it, that would be front page news. But if they didn't, it was just, you don't get that many chances at the front page for something like this. So then I got a break a few days before the announcement. The Supreme Court ruled on the individual mandate in Obamacare. Now, the Supreme Court buries their leads also. And they buried the lead on this one so badly that CNN and other news outlets first decided that Obamacare had lost. In fact, Obamacare had won, but it was a pretty embarrassing moment. So, in a rare moment of repertorial resourcefulness, I called up Ralph Hoyer, the Director General of CERN. There's Ralph. And I said, it really would be a drag if the same thing that happened with Obamacare happens with the Higgs announcement, This is your big moment in the sun. And Rolf, being a very wise statesman, immediately saw my point and agreed with me and told me what I needed to know. So a couple of days later, when they started the seminar at 1 o'clock in the morning, I was able to post the story online with the quote from Ralph Hoyer that they had found the Higgs boson. So I beat the Twitters and the bloggers, the social media people at last. Maybe one last time. It's my foolish pride, but I like it. So that's your Big Bang. And see, some stories do have a happy ending. So thank you. Sorry, this is taking longer than I thought. But. Oh, yeah, one last thought. It's such a beautiful slide, I just had to use it again. You should remember this, because it's not Einstein's universe, it's yours too. And you should tell your friends that. It's the only one they'll ever have.
So I think we have time for a few questions.
So, yeah.
Apparently
Could you speak up?
Sure, apparently the report I read a couple of months ago that the Times had published Einstein's general relativity in its entirety was wrong.
I don't know, I never heard that.
Okay. And the question is, what kind
they
of story
did-
would it take today to make multiple pages in the New York Times as a science story?
Stay tuned. Maybe somebody in this room will discover dark matter. That will be a bigger deal.
Other questions? Yeah.
What do we do to address the issue that was highlighted with your graph regarding astrology? How do we engage young Americans, Americans of all ages, to really understand what the scientific method means, how it operates, and the implications it has for this nation and the world?
I can tell you what not to do. You should not write any more long letters signed by 200 scientists against astrology, because it just makes you look like humorless people. You should make fun of it. That'd be a more effective way. Try to get them to have more two-dimensional characters on the Big Bang Theory.
Okay.
On Saturday mornings, we have a thing called the physics lectures. I imagine if you had attended any of those, you would have plenty of information to put into the New York Times, because they're really fantastic. I mean, it's all about physics, astrophysics, you name it. We've had a lecture on implanting hearing devices into babies.
Yeah.
Also, things like that would be a tremendous source of information for anything in the New York Times. And they're state-of-the-art. I mean, these are the people that are actually working on the edges of all of these.
I agree. That's one of the rewards of living in a college community. I think that this kind of stuff goes on all the time. And
Yeah, greetings from one dinosaur to another.
I'm sorry from.
A happy Darwin Day, or it would have been, except for the bill proposed by Rush Holt died in the House Anti-Science Committee, as Phil Plait likes to call it. The AAAS published a graph that shows science funding exponentially decaying with a half-life of about 10 years. If you look at science journalists, then I wonder if 10 years hence, there will be half as many journalists talking about half as much science done by half as many people.
Being paid half as much money.
Being paid as half as much money. And to that point, as an example of new media, the headline a week ago today was by a journalism professor from NYU, which the first paragraph of which described NASA as a panda, very cute, but maladapted to survive. And I wonder if, as one dinosaur to another,
That was like the lunchtime conversation I just had. But
a new emergent species of both physicists and journalists will appear, better adapted for the increasingly harsh environment in which we find ourselves.
I guess I would hope so. But
I have a question on your right. My question is, you mentioned some of the online criticism that you may or may not receive, and I was curious how you handle that. And for someone like me, I receive criticism and advice from my professors, but once you become a professional, how do you and where do you get some input from, and whose do you take?
let's see, do I understand the question? How do I respond to or handle criticism? Like, I don't reply to the blogs very much because I feel like they're doing their thing, I do my thing, But if they actually mischaracterize something I wrote, then I will write in and say that's not, that happened once or twice, and they're always shocked and surprised that I'm actually reading their blog. I answer all my email, even the most vituperative email, because it always comes back like, oh my God, I didn't know there was a human being there at the other end of the line. And, oh, you're doing great work. Keep it up. I didn't mean to. So that's actually quite rewarding. They become fans for some reason just because you bothered to answer their email.
Maybe I can ask you a question. As a science writer, you said you complained about scientists always bearing the lead. And so I can say from a scientist, we are always worried about a headline getting picked up out of our article that becomes completely over sensationalized, and then having to explain that maybe this theory is interesting to scientists, but isn't going to change the entirety of the world and go out to the blogosphere. So, in your opinion, what's the best way to strike this balance? Or is it not a problem that it's sensationalized?
I mean, it is a problem, and you have to, sometimes you have to hold people back. I mean, the people who write the headlines for my stories are not, depending on where they appear in the paper, they're not people that I've even talked to. So I've gotten rude surprises, like when Fizzles appears in a headline at midnight, because I just happened to go online and find it there, and that was a particularly bad time because the whole Atlas collaboration was having a meeting at NYU, and I'd been there that day. And then I went back to the office, and they said, well, the story's running tonight. Okay, great. So I'd just been sitting with all these people, and then they were going to read this headline that their collider was fizzling. I didn't want it to be that On the other hand, I don't think it probably looks and feels worse in the moment than it does over time. And sometimes you have to step back and look at things with a more distant eye. I mean, it didn't fizzle in the long run, but it certainly was fizzling then. But I wouldn't have used the word. I'm not sure I'm answering your question because I'm. I don't think there's a choice between burying the lead and having sensational headlines, but it helps. And I understand that, how a scientific paper works. That's how it works. But then you need to rein in the public affairs people who write the press releases that come out of those papers, because they tend to get pretty wild and excited. Because, of course, their job depends on convincing me that this is a big deal and it's going to be in the New York Times, and then they'll all get patted on the back. My editors get patted on the back if I write a story and they get it on the front page. And, oh, great, you're on the front page. But, you shouldn't be on the front page if you don't deserve to be on the front page.
So I was wondering if you could discuss more about the New York Times' stance and role on the politicization of science and science journalism.
I'm sorry, say that again.
The role and stance of a big newspaper like the New York Times on the politicization of science.
What do you mean by the politicization of science?
So, for instance, I have conservative friends who just don't believe in scientists. They think that they have agendas that are then, that are discussed in Congress and are promoting particular agendas as opposed to, the data speaking for itself. And how the New York Times then balances that in the wake of our current political situation.
Now that's a hard one, and it's particularly relevant to global warming. You kind of have to, if you're a scientist, you kind of have to separate out your scientific voice from you are a citizen and you are allowed to have your opinions and express them, but you kind of need to kind of keep them separate. So I think everybody was relieved when James Hansen retired so that he could just be James Hansen and not the crusading climatologist.
Hello. So I was just curious as to your journey, I suppose, in journalism. Did you start off as someone who knew he was going to be a science journalist, or did you begin as a journalist and then gravitated towards science journalism? And maybe what has influenced your decision to cover science journalism?
So I started out wanting to be a novelist and in love with science fiction, although I didn't want to write science fiction. Then I went to MIT, and because I'd gotten interested in science at MIT, I lost all my interest in science. And I eventually went back to trying to write a novel, and then that flamed out. And so I wound up working at Sky and Telescope as an assistant typesetter and proofreader. So science was something I knew about, and it was kind of a natural territory to explore because not many people were doing it or even are doing it. So, but I feel, I mean, in my heart, what I'm like is I'm a storyteller. I'm looking for the best stories. And this, you know, so this arena, cosmic affairs, is, I mean, it's unexplored territory in terms of really kind of literary exploration. Who are these people? What are they like? What are they saying about the universe? And, you know, what is the universe and what is it saying about us? So,
Hi.
I think we have time for 2 more questions.
I have a couple questions. One, I'm sure you're familiar with these terms being in media and covering science, but as you may hear, you may have heard of like the terms how we're in like, you know, web media 2.0 or web 2.0 versus like web 1.0, and there's talk about there being like a web 3.0 in terms of, you know, the internet and its capabilities or whatnot.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what your view of like the so-called or potential upcoming web 3.0 is, and also as a follow-up to what one of the previous people asked, do you feel that that one of the biggest, if not the biggest obstacle to people getting more interested in science is the politicization of science? Because I feel like that's one of the major, people get turned off by science because they feel the politicized science, for better or worse, is the real science, and that's not the case. And I'm wondering what your views on if that's an obstacle to why people are not more interested in say, physics or any other science for that
I'm
matter.
surprised that so many people are saying that science is politicized, but maybe I have a rosier view of it. I don't know about Web 3.0. I'm still trying to get used to Web 2.0. I'm sure if I go back to New York and ask all my web digital friends about it, they'll say, oh, they'll know what it is, but I have no idea what it is. I mean, at the Times, we've been experimenting more and more with embedding graphics and video and things into stories and long narrative stories, which is fun. We don't do that many. We don't get to do that many of them. That takes a lot of time and resources. And I expect the appetite for them is a little bit limited. I mean,
Last question up before.
I was wondering how the length debate is happening at the New York Times between shorter articles where readers are likely to read the whole thing, especially if it's online, or longer articles that go into depth.
We're having ongoing fights about that. Lately, there's been a movement towards what they call, it's a terrible term, but they call long-form journalism, these long narrative stories. And they found that actually people will read them online. They'll sit there and they'll click through all those 20 screens to get to the end. If there's bells and whistles and graphics and movies and things embedded in them. And I mean, that's the future of storytelling in some way. And we're still trying to crack it. But there was this story published a couple of years ago called Snowfall, which is about some skiers who got caught in an avalanche in Washington. And it won a Pulitzer Prize. It was an amazing amount of research on snow and avalanches and things. Reading it, I learned a lot about that. And since then, that's become Snowfall. It's called. It's kind of it's become the archetype for kind of a new kind of journalism. But it can't all be that, because people like shorter stories too. The thing that's deadly is like if every story is the same 1,000 words. We're always trying to get longer stories on the front page, and the front page editors are always telling us to keep them short. There was a big fight we had with Bill Keller, who used to be the editor, and he just left to join a web-based organization. Seriously. So there's no consensus about that, except, I mean, people will read long articles online, according to the people whose job it is to know that at the Times.
Okay, well, please join me in thanking our speaker again.